CS5 introduces a whole new category of brushes and bristle tips designed to mimic real-life brushes that painters use. In this lesson, I'll also show you how to automatically add variation to individual brush strokes, and along the way, we'll take a look at the benefits of using a drawing tablet. First things first, let's go to our Chapter 7 folder and open up the file HUD. This is our plain white canvas. If you have this file still open from the previous lesson, I want you to go ahead and press Shift F5. That'll bring up the fill dialog box, and I want you to fill the contents with white. That'll give you a plain white canvas like you see on my screen. I want you to select your brush tool, press B on the keyboard. I'm going to press F to cycle into full screen mode with menu bar here on the Mac, and let's drag this over nicely into the center. Now I want to point out that in the options bar, we've got our brush panel icon here. If we simply click it, it brings up our brush panel. By default, brush is bundled here with brush presets, which is fine, but also with clone source, which we're not going to use. So let's just get rid of it. We'll click on the tab, drag this out on its own, and delete it. And let's move this just slightly out of our way. And I'm going to click the brush presets tab here. And you can see if we start from the top, we've got our normal brushes, but just below these we have a whole new category of brushes distinguishable by their icons. Very detailed icons of actual brushes. Let's click on here. We've got a fan shape brush, and notice that once I click on this brush, and these are the natural media brushes, you can see that I've got a brush preview over here that will actually show us the angle rotation of the brush as well as any changes that we make to it. Now there's a few different ways to view this. Right now I've got this set to a color viewing. If you hold down the shift key and click, it will go to the default black and white view. I'll shift click again to go to color. And I've got a drawing tablet hooked up to my computer, so I want to show you how this preview picks up those drawing tablet changes. I'm simply holding the pen now, and as I rotate the pen, you can see that brush preview rotating in a 3D space. Now we can actually change the perspective from which we're viewing this brush. If I click in this window, I'm viewing the brush from the right. You can see the light and shadow, how they fall alongside the brush, and it's tracking my movements. A second click will take me to a top-down view of it. So it's as if I'm viewing the brush looking straight down on it. And again, it's nicely tracking my movements with the pen hovering over the drawing tablet. If I click a third time, that takes me to a left view of the brush. So a lot of options here, and you can use whichever one is more comfortable. Now let's click on the brush panel here, because there are some very exciting qualities to these natural media brushes, and they're all grouped together under the bristle qualities section of the brush panel. We can change the shape of this brush. Right now it's a round fan. We could make it a flat point. Notice here our preview updates automatically, so we have a good visual as to what our brush is going to look like. We can adjust the amount of bristles. We can have fewer bristles in the brush. We can have more bristles in the brush. And we can also adjust the length here. We can make the brush longer. We can make the brush shorter. We can adjust the thickness of individual bristles. We can also adjust the stiffness and angle. Now if you're using a drawing tablet like I am, stiffness and angle can be controlled by the pressure and angle of your pen, but if you're going to be using a mouse, these are two settings that you can come here and adjust as you paint. I'm going to set this shape back to where it was originally, to a rounded fan, and let's see what happens if we take bristles all the way down so that we're just painting with actually two bristles here on this brush. And I'm simply going to come over in this document and draw. You can see that we now have a markedly different brush, and because of the angle at which I'm holding the pen, only one of those two bristles is actually touching the canvas. Let's drag this out and add more bristles and see the difference. So again, the only thing I've changed is the amount of bristles on this brush. We can change the length here. If I make this a longer brush, then we can alter characteristics of this stroke. I paint here, and you can see with that longer brush and the longer bristles, I'm getting a much different stroke than I was originally. So we can change a lot of qualities here in terms of how the bristles are affected. We can also change the spacing here. If I change this, we will get a much different brush shape, and you can see that updating here in this little preview box. So if we paint with that spacing set all the way to 86%, again, a much different type of brush stroke. So you can get a sense here of the creative possibilities. You can really fiddle around with so many parameters for these brushes and get very realistic effects. So that's something you want to spend some time experimenting with, setting up parameters so that you end up with a brush that has the exact characteristics that you're looking for. What I'd like to talk to you about now is brush dynamics. And for that, I'm going to choose one of our standard normal brushes here, because this is something that's really powerful. Now, before we move any further, I want to clear out the contents of this, so I'm simply going to press Shift F5 to bring up Edit Fill, and I'm going to fill the contents with white. Now, inside the brush panel, you can see that there are much fewer options here than with the natural media brushes, but let's click on Shape Dynamics. This is really exciting because what you can do is use these jitter functions to add randomness to your brush strokes. We've got a size jitter here. I'm going to drag this pretty far over to the right, and what this is going to do is randomize the size along our brush stroke. We've got an angle jitter. We could adjust that as well. And we could also adjust roundness. To really see this take effect, we're going to go back to brush tip shape and change spacing here so that we can actually see individual shapes with each brush stroke. And look at this randomness here. The size, the angle, and the roundness are all different. And if we simply paint here, just by dragging in one stroke, I'm getting a nice variation here. But that's just the beginning. Let's go down here to scattering, and we can choose to scatter these strokes. If I drag this down here to the left, they all sort of fall along the traditional curve that brush strokes do. But if I drag them all the way over here to the right, you can see that these dots now are very scattered, so that's going to give us a very random approach. We can adjust the count here in terms of how many we have. So if I increase the count number here, you can see in our preview box that a lot of elements will be added to each individual brush stroke. And of course, if we adjust the count jitter here, it will randomize that. So again, I'll just come in here and paint with this. And again, just a simple stroke, and look at how it's scattering all of those. So you can see just how easy it is to get some creative, interesting effects regardless of your drawing ability. The other thing I want to show you here that's really fun is color dynamics. Now we've got here a foreground background jitter, which is simply going to randomize the color from our foreground color, stretching all the way through to our background color and picking up colors in between. So we're going to place the jitter fairly high here. We can also adjust the hue. I've got hue up pretty high, which looks good. I'll boost it a little more, and saturation up here is set pretty high. So now when we paint, watch what's going to happen. I'm going to hit Shift F5 to clear this out so we have a nice blank canvas to work with. And I'm simply going to paint as I did before, and now look at that. In addition to the randomness that we had before, we've now added color. So this is picking up all the colors in the spectrum from blue to white and randomizing it. Now this is a fun way to play with brushes, but if you're using a drawing tablet, there's even more control you can have over this, and I'll show you how to do that. Let's go back to Shape Dynamics. I'm going to hit Shift F5 to clear our canvas. And under Size Jitter, we have a control menu. Now when we turn this off, the jitter just happens randomly. But if we have a drawing tablet attached, we can choose pen pressure. And this will adjust the size based on how much pressure we apply with the pen. So with all of our settings the same way we had them before, watch what happens if I set pen pressure to control the size jitter. I'll start down here in the bottom, and I'm going to start with very light pressure from my pen. And notice the size, they're very small. As I increase pressure and drag, they get bigger. So again, it's very easy to start and get some very creative shapes here. Again, very light pressure gives us small elements, and as I hold down the pen harder, I get larger elements. So a great way to get some nice design elements here simply by varying the pressure you're applying to the pen. I'm going to clear this out by pressing Shift F5, and hit OK to fill it with white. Now a couple of other options when you're using a drawing tablet that I want to talk about here. Up in the options bar, we have an opacity control. You can manually set this if you're using a mouse by simply going and typing in an opacity amount here. But if you're using a drawing tablet, you can simply click on this icon, which will target the opacity to the strength of which you're painting with the brush. So a very light pressure with the brush will yield a low opacity. I'm going to go back to our brush presets here and just set a normal, regular, plain old brush so it'll be very obvious what I'm talking about here. I'm going to click on this brush here, and I've got a decent sized brush. I'm going to increase it a bit by pressing the right bracket key, make that bigger. Now if I start painting with a very light pressure, I'm getting a very low opacity here, but as I press the mouse down harder and harder, I'm getting a much stronger opacity. So if I started a stroke very heavily, I can get that, and I can ease up on the pressure and get a very light opacity here. I'm going to actually click now to a brush that has a more feathered edge so we can see what that would look like. So here we've got a light opacity, barely filling in, and we get heavier and heavier. Now we've got another useful option up here, and this is our size control for a drawing tablet. When we toggle this on, no matter what brush size we have selected here, we can choose to begin with a smaller diameter brush simply by painting with less pressure. So I'm going to start here with less pressure, and you can see that I'm getting a very, very small brush size, but as I press down harder and harder, this line is getting larger and larger until ultimately it fills up to the maximum dimension of the brush size that I had manually selected. So you can start with a little wisp of something down here and make that larger and larger. So when using a drawing tablet, you can really take full advantage of Photoshop's brush tools, even just using the plain old standard brushes. They give you a phenomenal amount of control when you're drawing, and then when you apply that to these new natural media brushes, really you're only limited by your imagination.